As you settle into the gentle embrace of evening, preparing for rest, imagine your consciousness slowly releasing its grip on the certainties that have guided your day. The unquestioned beliefs, the assumed facts, the taken for granted knowledge that forms the invisible foundation of your thoughts and actions. Tonight, you embark on an extraordinary journey into the deepest questions human beings have ever asked. How do we know what we know? What transforms mere opinion into genuine knowledge? What is the nature of truth itself, and how can finite minds like ours hope to grasp it? You may wonder why questions about knowledge matter as you prepare for sleep. The answer lies in something profound yet simple. Every dream you're about to enter, every memory you cherish, every belief that shapes your understanding of yourself and the world, all of these depend on the mysterious processes by which consciousness transforms experience into knowledge. Even the certainty that you exist, that you're lying here contemplating these words, rests on foundations that philosophers have debated for millennia without reaching complete consensus. Tonight, we'll explore these fundamental questions together, traveling through centuries of human inquiry into the nature of knowledge itself. I invite you to approach these ideas with gentle curiosity, allowing each perspective to flow through your awareness like water through a landscape. Some insights may challenge assumptions you've never questioned. Others might illuminate truths you've always sensed but never articulated. All of them belong to our shared human quest to understand not just the world around us, but the very processes by which we come to understand anything at all. Imagine yourself standing at the entrance to an ancient library, not one filled with books, but with crystallized moments of knowing. Each shelf contains different types of knowledge, sensory experiences that seem to show us the world directly, rational insights that appear to reveal logical truths, intuitive understandings that feel certain despite their mysterious origins, and cultural wisdom passed down through generations. The library exists in a twilight space between certainty and doubt, where every claim to knowledge casts shadows of uncertainty, and every doubt opens doorways to new possibilities for understanding. As your eyes adjust to this epistemological twilight, you notice something remarkable about the library's architecture. The foundations seem both solid and shifting, built on bedrock that, upon closer inspection, reveals itself to be composed of assumptions that might themselves require justification. The structure appears simultaneously ancient and contemporary, as if every age has rebuilt it while using materials salvaged from previous constructions. This is the edifice of human knowledge, always under construction, never quite complete, yet somehow stable enough to support the entire enterprise of civilization. A gentle voice emerges from the space between certainty and doubt, speaking not from any particular location, but from the very atmosphere of inquiry itself. The journey we're about to undertake, it begins, starts with perhaps the most fundamental recognition in all of philosophy, that the question, how do we know, is both unavoidable and extraordinarily difficult. Every answer we might give seems to depend on assumptions about knowledge that themselves require justification. This creates what philosophers call the problem of the criterion. How can we determine what counts as genuine knowledge without already knowing what knowledge is? As this voice speaks, you feel yourself sinking deeper into a state of philosophical receptivity. The library around you seems both more vivid and more dreamlike. The boundary between your personal beliefs and the vast exploration of knowledge unfolding before you becomes pleasantly blurred. You are both a seeker after knowledge and knowledge, seeking to understand itself through your consciousness. Before we explore specific theories of knowledge, the voice continues, I want to invite you to notice something about your own relationship to knowing. Right now, you believe certain things, that you're listening to these words, that you have a past and an anticipated future, that the physical world exists independently of your perceptions. But how do you know these things? What transforms mere belief or opinion into justified knowledge? What distinguishes truth from error, wisdom from illusion, understanding from mere information? You notice your breathing has naturally slowed, each breath creating its own rhythm of knowing, the inhalation bringing new possibilities for understanding, the exhalation releasing attachment to premature certainties, the pause between breaths touching a space where questions exist in pure potentiality before hardening into specific inquiries. The library seems to pulse gently with this rhythm, as if the very foundations of knowledge respond to the biological processes that sustain consciousness. The questions we'll explore tonight have puzzled human beings since consciousness first became aware of its own knowing process, the voice explains. What is the relationship between the knower and the known? Can we have certain knowledge about anything, or are we forever trapped in webs of interpretation and assumption? Do we discover truth or create it? Is knowledge primarily a product of sensory experience, rational analysis, divine revelation, cultural construction, or something else entirely? These questions matter not just for abstract philosophy, but for how we live, what we trust, whom we believe, how we make decisions in a world full of competing claims to truth. As you listen, you begin to feel a subtle shift in your relationship to knowledge itself. The library around you becomes a metaphor for consciousness, a space where different forms of knowing can coexist, where questions and answers engage in an eternal dance, where certainty and doubt reveal themselves as complementary rather than opposing forces. You're aware of your own knowledge-making processes, how perception becomes interpretation, how memory shapes understanding, how desire influences belief. Are you ready? The voice asks, though it's not really a question requiring an answer. It's an invitation to step beyond the comfortable assumption that knowledge is something we simply possess into territories where knowledge reveals itself as an ongoing process, a relationship, a kind of dance between consciousness and reality. You feel yourself nodding almost imperceptibly, and with that gentle gesture of openness, you cross the threshold into realms where the most basic assumptions about knowledge are revealed to be far more mysterious and wonderful than they initially appear. The crystallized moments of knowing around you now pulse with gentle light, each one representing a different approach to the fundamental questions of epistemology waiting to be explored. Your eyelids may feel heavy at times, and that's perfectly natural. This journey is designed to accompany you as you drift between waking consciousness and sleep, carrying these deep questions about knowledge into dreams where different forms of knowing operate according to principles that might illuminate the mysteries we'll explore together. Our first exploration, the voice begins, takes us to ancient Greece, where philosophers first systematically distinguished between different types of knowledge and began the long inquiry into the foundations of human understanding. But even before we encounter specific philosophical positions, we must grapple with the basic recognition that divided knowledge seekers from the very beginning, the distinction between those who claimed certain knowledge was possible and those who argued that such certainty forever eludes human grasp. As these words are spoken, the library transforms around you. Some sections glow with the warm light of apparent certainty, areas where knowledge claims seem solid and well-founded. Other sections remain shrouded in gentle shadows, territories where doubt and skepticism reveal the provisional nature of all human understanding. This division between confidence and uncertainty will guide your entire journey through the landscape of knowledge, showing how every claim to certain knowledge generates its own shadow of possible doubt, while every expression of skepticism opens space for new forms of understanding to emerge. The gentle rhythm of your breathing continues to deepen your relaxation as you prepare to explore the fundamental tension between knowledge and doubt that has shaped human intellectual history. Your journey through epistemological questions has begun, and already you can feel your consciousness expanding to accommodate relationships to knowledge that transcend the simple assumption that we either know something with certainty or remain completely ignorant. The exploration deepens as we move toward discovering how this tension between knowledge and skepticism first found systematic expression in the philosophy of ancient Greece. As you drift deeper into the library of knowledge, the gentle shadows and warm lights begin to coalesce into the marble architecture of ancient Athens, where the fundamental questions about knowledge first received systematic attention. The air itself seems to shimmer with intellectual curiosity and the kind of patient inquiry that transforms casual conversation into philosophical discovery. Here, in the agora and academies of classical Greece, human beings first developed the vocabulary and conceptual tools that still shape how we think about thinking itself. Welcome to the birthplace of systematic epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the measured cadence of ancient philosophical dialogue and the gentle wisdom of thinkers who discovered that the deepest knowledge often begins with recognizing the limits of what we think we know. Here we encounter Socrates, the philosopher who revolutionized the pursuit of knowledge, not by claiming to possess great wisdom, but by systematically demonstrating how little any of us actually understand about the things we think we know with certainty. As you move through this ancient philosophical landscape, you first encounter Socrates himself, not in a formal school, but in the bustling marketplace, engaged in conversation with confident citizens who believe they possess clear knowledge about justice, courage, piety, and virtue. Through his gentle but persistent questioning, Socrates reveals something startling. Those who seem most certain about their knowledge often cannot provide adequate definitions or justifications for their beliefs when subjected to careful examination. The Socratic method, the voice explains, demonstrates a profound epistemological insight through its practice of systematic questioning. When Socrates asks, "What is justice?" he's not seeking a simple definition, but uncovering how complex and mysterious even our most basic concepts become when examined carefully. The confident citizen who claims to know what justice is quickly discovers that every attempted definition leads to new questions, contradictions, or circular reasoning. The marketplace demonstrates this through living examples that unfold before your relaxed awareness. You observe conversations where initial certainty gradually dissolves into productive confusion, not the confusion of ignorance, but the confusion that comes from recognizing that genuine knowledge is far more elusive and interesting than confident opinion. This Socratic recognition doesn't lead to despair, but to wonder, the philosophical emotion that opens the mind to deeper inquiry. What makes Socratic questioning so profound, the voice continues, is how it reveals the difference between thinking you know and actually knowing. Most of us navigate daily life with countless unexamined beliefs and assumptions. We think we know what love is until we try to define it precisely. We feel certain about moral principles until we examine their foundations and implications. Socratic ignorance, knowing that you don't know, becomes the foundation for genuine learning. The ancient setting now reveals how this recognition of ignorance paradoxically becomes a form of wisdom. The oracle at Delphi proclaimed Socrates the wisest person in Athens, not because he possessed the most information, but because he alone, among the city's intellectuals, recognized the extent of his own ignorance. This creates the famous Socratic paradox. The wise person is the one who knows that they don't know, while the ignorant person is the one who thinks they know when they don't. This paradox, the voice notes, introduces us to one of epistemology's central insights, that self-knowledge, understanding the limits and processes of our own knowing, is fundamental to any genuine knowledge. Before we can reliably understand the external world, we need to understand how our minds work, what their limitations are, and how easily they can be deceived by appearances, assumptions, and wishful thinking. As you contemplate this Socratic wisdom, the marketplace reveals its deeper epistemological implications. The questioning method doesn't just examine particular beliefs, but reveals general patterns in how human beings form and maintain beliefs. You observe how social pressure, emotional attachment, and cognitive shortcuts can masquerade as rational justification. You see how genuine inquiry requires courage, the willingness to have cherished beliefs challenged and potentially overturned. Socratic questioning also reveals the social nature of knowledge, the voice continues, its tone growing gentler as your relaxation deepens. Knowledge emerges through dialogue, through the encounter between different perspectives, through the patient work of examining ideas together. No individual mind, working in isolation, can easily detect its own blind spots, hidden assumptions, or reasoning errors. We need others to help us see what we cannot see ourselves. The ancient marketplace transforms to show how this dialogical approach to knowledge differs from both dogmatic assertion and pure skepticism. Unlike the dogmatist who claims certain knowledge without adequate justification, and unlike the skeptic who abandons the possibility of knowledge altogether, the Socratic approach maintains what we might call inquiring ignorance, a stance that remains open to learning while acknowledging the provisional nature of all human knowledge claims. This Socratic recognition, the voice observes, creates what we might call the epistemological attitude, a way of engaging with knowledge claims that combines intellectual humility with persistent curiosity. It suggests that the goal of intellectual inquiry is not to accumulate a collection of certain facts, but to develop better processes of thinking, questioning, and understanding. Knowledge becomes less about possessing information and more about participating skillfully in ongoing inquiry. The marketplace now demonstrates how this epistemological attitude transforms everyday interactions with knowledge claims. Instead of immediately accepting or rejecting new information, the Socratic approach asks, what are the assumptions underlying this claim? What evidence supports it? What questions does it raise? How does it connect with other things we think we know? What would change our minds about it? What's particularly profound about the Socratic approach, the voice continues, is how it transforms the relationship between knowledge and certainty. Instead of requiring absolute certainty before accepting anything as knowledge, it suggests that knowledge can be provisional, revisable, and contextual, while still being valuable and reliable for practical purposes. This opens up possibilities for knowledge that don't depend on achieving impossible standards of absolute certainty. The ancient setting now reveals its influence extending forward through centuries of philosophical development. You can perceive how the Socratic recognition of ignorance laid the foundation for all subsequent epistemological inquiry, creating the space within which debates about empiricism and rationalism, skepticism and dogmatism, objective and subjective knowledge could unfold productively rather than defensively. The Socratic legacy, the voice suggests, teaches us that intellectual maturity begins with recognizing how much we don't know and how easily our confidence can exceed our actual understanding. This doesn't lead to paralysis, but to better calibrated confidence, holding beliefs with appropriate degrees of certainty based on the quality of available evidence and reasoning rather than on psychological factors like familiarity, social reinforcement, or emotional appeal. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the rhythm of questioning, not the aggressive interrogation that seeks to destroy beliefs, but the gentle inquiry that helps beliefs become more accurate, more nuanced, and more honestly held. Your breathing synchronizes with this rhythm of inquiry, each breath creating space for questions, each exhalation releasing attachment to premature certainties. As we prepare to explore how later philosophers built upon this Socratic foundation, the voice says, notice how the recognition of ignorance paradoxically increases rather than decreases your capacity for genuine learning. The pressure to defend fixed positions relaxes into curiosity about what might be true. The anxiety about being wrong transforms into appreciation for error as a guide toward better understanding. The fear of uncertainty dissolves into fascination with the ongoing adventure of inquiry. The marble columns of ancient Athens begin to flow and transform, preparing to accommodate the systematic epistemological theories that emerged from this Socratic foundation. Your journey through questions about knowledge continues, carrying you toward territories where the recognition of ignorance becomes the starting point for constructing elaborate theories about how genuine knowledge might be possible despite the limitations Socrates revealed. The gentle rhythm of your breathing now carries both the humility of Socratic ignorance and the curiosity that drives continued inquiry, preparing you to explore how philosophers attempted to build reliable knowledge on foundations that acknowledge rather than deny the fallibility of human understanding. Each breath draws in wonder. Each exhalation releases false certainty, creating space for the more sophisticated approaches to knowledge that emerged from recognizing both the possibility and the difficulty of human understanding. As the marble columns of Socratic inquiry begin to soar upward, they transform into the magnificent architecture of Plato's Academy, where the recognition of ignorance becomes the first step in a systematic ascent toward genuine knowledge. The afternoon light filtering through these philosophical halls carries an otherworldly quality, as if illuminated not just by the physical sun, but by the light of understanding itself, what Plato called the form of the good, the ultimate source of all truth and knowledge. Welcome to the Platonic vision of knowledge, the voice greets you, now carrying the grandeur of systematic philosophy and the patient confidence of a thinker who believed that genuine knowledge, though difficult to attain, remains within human reach for those willing to undertake the proper intellectual and spiritual discipline. Here we encounter the first comprehensive theory of knowledge in Western philosophy, a vision that distinguishes between the shifting world of appearances and the stable realm of eternal truths, between opinion based on sensory experience and knowledge based on rational insight. As you enter Plato's Academy, you first encounter the famous allegory of the cave, enacted not as abstract description, but as lived experience. You find yourself among prisoners chained in an underground cavern, watching shadows dance on the wall, shadows cast by objects carried behind you by people walking past a fire. These shadows represent the world of sensory experience, the realm of appearances where most human beings spend their entire lives, mistaking images and reflections for reality itself. The cave allegory, the voice explains, illustrates Plato's fundamental epistemological insight that what we normally call knowledge, information derived from sensory experience, is actually a form of ignorance. The prisoners who mistake shadows for reality are like people who mistake the changing world of physical objects, perceived through fallible senses, for the ultimate nature of reality. True knowledge requires turning away from sensory appearances toward the eternal realm of forms that can only be grasped through rational insight. The cave scenario transforms around your contemplative awareness. You experience the prisoner's liberation, the painful turning away from familiar shadows, the difficult ascent toward the cave's entrance, the blinding encounter with sunlight that represents the light of true knowledge. This ascent requires not just intellectual effort, but a complete reorientation of consciousness away from the familiar world of sensory experience toward abstract, rational truths. Platonic epistemology, the voice continues, proposes that genuine knowledge has three essential characteristics. It must be of what is real rather than apparent. It must be certain rather than merely probable. And it must be eternal rather than temporary. Only the forms, perfect, unchanging essences like justice itself, beauty itself, equality itself, meet these criteria. The physical world, constantly changing and perceived through fallible senses, can only be the object of opinion, not genuine knowledge. The Academy now reveals how this theory addresses the Socratic problem of ignorance. When Socrates asked, "What is justice?" and discovered that no one could provide an adequate definition, Plato concluded that justice in the physical world, particular just actions, laws, or institutions, are merely imperfect copies of the form of justice, which exists in an eternal realm accessible only to rational insight. Knowledge becomes possible when consciousness grasps these eternal forms directly. This creates Plato's famous epistemological hierarchy, the voice explains. At the bottom is imagination, acasia, which mistakes images and reflections for reality. Above that is belief, pistis, which takes physical objects as ultimately real. Higher still is mathematical reasoning, dianoia, which grasps eternal truths but relies on physical diagrams and assumptions. At the top is dialectical understanding, episteme, which grasps the forms directly through pure, rational insight. As you ascend through these levels of knowing, the Academy demonstrates each through lived examples. You observe how geometric understanding points beyond physical diagrams toward eternal mathematical relationships. You experience how dialectical reasoning moves from assumptions toward first principles that require no further justification. You glimpse how the philosopher king, trained in this epistemological ascent, can govern justly because they know justice itself rather than mere opinions about justice. What makes Platonic epistemology particularly profound, the voice notes, is how it explains both the possibility and the difficulty of genuine knowledge. Knowledge is possible because the eternal forms exist as stable objects of understanding. But knowledge is difficult because it requires overcoming the natural tendency to trust sensory experience and the cultural pressure to accept conventional opinions. The path to knowledge demands both intellectual discipline and moral purification. The Academy reveals how this epistemological theory connects to Plato's famous doctrine of recollection. Since the soul existed in the eternal realm before birth and directly perceived the forms, learning becomes a process of remembering what the soul already knows but has forgotten through incarnation in a physical body. The teacher's role is not to implant new information, but to help students recover their innate knowledge through proper questioning and guidance. This doctrine of recollection, the voice continues, its tone growing more contemplative as your relaxation deepens, suggests that genuine knowledge has an intimate, personal quality that goes beyond mere information processing. When you truly understand a mathematical proof or grasp a moral principle, there's a sense of recognition. Yes, this is true. That suggests the soul's reconnection with eternal truths it has always known but temporarily forgotten. The Academy now demonstrates how Platonic epistemology transforms the relationship between knowledge and certainty. Instead of settling for provisional knowledge based on probable evidence, Plato insists that genuine knowledge must be absolutely certain because it grasps eternal truths that cannot change. This creates extraordinarily high standards for knowledge, perhaps too high, as later philosophers would argue, but also provides a vision of intellectual fulfillment that continues to inspire seekers after wisdom. The Platonic approach, the voice observes, also reveals the inherently transformative nature of genuine knowledge. To know the form of justice is not just to understand an abstract concept, but to become more just as a person. To grasp the form of beauty is to be transformed by beauty. Knowledge and wisdom, understanding and virtue, intellectual insight, and spiritual development are intimately connected rather than separate enterprises. The Academy's architecture now reveals its deeper symbolic meaning. The systematic progression from physical to mathematical to dialectical studies represents the soul's gradual preparation for direct insight into eternal truth. The philosopher's education becomes a carefully structured process of intellectual and spiritual purification that prepares consciousness to receive the light of genuine understanding. What's particularly remarkable about Plato's epistemology, the voice continues, is how it maintains both the highest standards for genuine knowledge and the deepest optimism about human capacity to attain such knowledge. Though few will complete the full philosophical journey, every human being participates to some degree in the realm of eternal truth. Even sensory experience, though limited and potentially deceptive, provides indirect access to the forms through their imperfect physical manifestations. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now glow with the light of the forms themselves, eternal, perfect, unchanging truths that serve as the ultimate standards for all genuine knowledge. Your breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of dialectical ascent, each breath lifting consciousness toward higher levels of understanding, each exhalation releasing attachment to mere appearances. As we prepare to explore how later philosophers challenged and modified the Platonic vision, the voice suggests, notice how this approach to knowledge transforms intellectual humility into intellectual aspiration. The recognition that sensory knowledge is limited becomes motivation for the difficult ascent toward rational insight. The acknowledgement that most human beliefs are mere opinions becomes the foundation for disciplined pursuit of genuine understanding. The soaring architecture of Plato's Academy begins to shift and flow, preparing to accommodate the more empirically grounded approaches to knowledge that emerged partly in response to Platonic rationalism. Your journey through epistemological questions continues, carrying you toward territories where the Platonic confidence in rational access to eternal truth encounters challenges from philosophers who questioned whether knowledge requires such transcendent foundations. The gentle rhythm of your breathing now carries both the aspiration toward absolute knowledge and the humility about human limitations, preparing you to explore how the tension between rationalist and empiricist approaches to knowledge has shaped centuries of philosophical development. Each breath draws in the possibility of certain knowledge. Each exhalation releases attachment to impossible epistemological standards, creating space for more modest, but perhaps more reliable approaches to understanding the world and ourselves. As the transcendent architecture of Plato's Academy gradually descends and grounds itself in more earthly materials, the philosophical landscape transforms into Aristotle's Lyceum, a place where knowledge is sought not by escaping the physical world, but by carefully observing and systematically understanding it. The light here is not the otherworldly illumination of eternal forms, but the clear, steady radiance of careful observation and logical analysis applied to the rich complexity of natural phenomena. Welcome to the birthplace of empirical epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the methodical precision of systematic observation and the patient confidence of a thinker who believed that genuine knowledge emerges from careful attention to the world as it actually presents itself to experience. Here we encounter Aristotle's revolutionary insight that reliable knowledge can be built from sensory experience through proper methodology, logical analysis, and systematic classification, without requiring escape to a transcendent realm of eternal forms. As you enter the Lyceum, you immediately notice its different character from Plato's Academy. Instead of moving away from physical reality toward abstract truth, the philosophical activity here moves deeper into physical reality to discover the principles and patterns that govern natural phenomena. Students examine biological specimens, collect and classify different types of constitutions, analyze logical arguments, and develop systematic accounts of everything from ethics to astronomy. Aristotelian epistemology, the voice explains, begins with a fundamental challenge to Platonic dualism between the world of appearances and the realm of true reality. For Aristotle, the physical world we experience through our senses is genuinely real, not a pale copy of some more fundamental reality. The task of knowledge is not to escape this world, but to understand it better, to discover the forms, purposes, and causal relationships that structure natural phenomena. The Lyceum demonstrates this empirical approach through countless examples of systematic observation and analysis. You observe students examining the anatomy of different animals to understand biological functions, collecting examples of different political systems to understand the principles of good governance, and analyzing syllogistic arguments to understand the principles of valid reasoning. Knowledge emerges through careful attention to particulars guided by logical principles and systematic methodology. This creates a very different epistemological vision from Plato's, the voice continues. Instead of moving from the physical to the mathematical to the purely rational, Aristotelian knowledge begins with sensory experience, moves through careful observation and classification, and culminates in understanding the essential natures and causal relationships that explain why things are as they are. Knowledge becomes scientific in the sense of being systematic, empirically grounded, and logically rigorous. The philosophical environment now reveals Aristotle's famous doctrine that all learning comes from pre-existing knowledge, which he interprets very differently from Plato's doctrine of recollection. Instead of remembering eternal truths glimpsed before birth, learning involves building new knowledge on foundations of previous knowledge, moving from what is more familiar to us, particular sensory experiences, toward what is more familiar in itself, universal principles and causes. Aristotelian epistemology, the voice explains, distinguishes between different types of knowledge appropriate to different domains of reality. Theoretical knowledge, episteme, seeks understanding for its own sake and aims at universal necessary truths. Practical knowledge, phronesis, guides action in particular situations and requires judgment about variable human affairs. Productive knowledge, techn, aims at making useful objects and requires skill in applying general principles to specific cases. This tripartite division transforms your understanding of knowledge by showing how different cognitive capacities are needed for different purposes. You observe how theoretical knowledge about mathematics or natural science operates differently from practical wisdom about ethics and politics, which operates differently from technical skill in crafts or arts. Knowledge becomes plural rather than singular, not one capacity, but multiple capacities appropriate to different aspects of reality. What's particularly profound about Aristotle's approach, the voice notes, is how it grounds reliable knowledge in careful attention to experience without falling into simple empiricism. Sensory experience alone cannot yield genuine knowledge because the senses show us only particulars, while knowledge seeks universal principles. But reason alone cannot yield genuine knowledge because it needs content from experience to avoid empty speculation. Knowledge emerges through the interaction of experience and reasoning. The Lyceum now demonstrates this through detailed examples of how Aristotelian science actually works. You observe the process of moving from particular observations, this swan is white, that swan is white, through systematic collection of data, toward provisional universal claims, all swans are white, that remain open to revision based on further experience. But you also see how reason contributes essential structure, principles of classification, logical criteria for valid inference, methodological rules for reliable observation. This creates what we might call moderate empiricism. The voice continues, its tone growing gentler as your contemplation deepens. Unlike naive empiricism, which trusts the senses uncritically, Aristotelian empiricism recognizes that sensory experience must be carefully organized, critically evaluated, and logically analyzed to yield reliable knowledge. Unlike pure rationalism, which distrusts sensory experience entirely, Aristotelian epistemology sees properly interpreted experience as the essential foundation for all natural knowledge. The systematic organization of the Lyceum reveals another crucial aspect of Aristotelian epistemology, its emphasis on classification and definition as tools for organizing knowledge. You observe how biological knowledge advances through careful classification of different species according to their essential characteristics. How ethical knowledge develops through precise definitions of virtues and their relationships. How logical knowledge emerges through systematic analysis of different forms of valid argument. This emphasis on classification and definition, the voice explains, reflects Aristotle's insight that knowledge is not just accumulation of facts, but systematic organization of understanding. To know something scientifically is to understand how it fits into the larger system of natural relationships, what its essential characteristics are, what causes account for its existence and behavior, and how it relates to other phenomena in its domain. The Lyceum now reveals how this systematic approach addresses some of the problems that plagued Platonic epistemology. Instead of requiring mystical insight into transcendent forms, Aristotelian knowledge builds on capacities, sensation, memory, imagination, reasoning, that all normally functioning human beings possess. Instead of creating an unbridgeable gap between appearance and reality, it shows how careful attention to appearances can reveal genuine reality. Aristotelian epistemology also introduces a more dynamic understanding of the relationship between knowledge and certainty, the voice observes. Instead of requiring absolute certainty before accepting anything as knowledge, it recognizes degrees of certainty appropriate to different domains. Mathematical knowledge can achieve demonstrative certainty. Natural science achieves high probability based on extensive observation. Practical wisdom achieves the certainty appropriate for action in particular circumstances. This graduated understanding of certainty creates a more flexible and realistic approach to knowledge that acknowledges both human cognitive limitations and the genuine possibility of reliable understanding. You observe how this allows for scientific progress. Theories can be improved, corrected, and extended without completely abandoning the scientific enterprise when absolute certainty proves unattainable. What makes Aristotelian epistemology particularly enduring, the voice continues, is how it provides methodological guidance for actually acquiring knowledge rather than just theoretical arguments about knowledge's possibility. The logical works provide tools for valid reasoning. The scientific works demonstrate methods for systematic observation and explanation. The practical works show how judgment operates in domains where theoretical knowledge must be applied to particular situations. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the steady rhythm of systematic inquiry, careful observation leading to provisional generalization, logical analysis, testing the coherence of emerging theories, practical application, checking theoretical insights against lived experience. Your breathing synchronizes with this methodical rhythm, each breath supporting sustained attention, each exhalation releasing premature conclusions. As we prepare to explore how later philosophers built on or challenged the Aristotelian foundation, the voice suggests, notice how this approach transforms the relationship between intellectual humility and intellectual confidence. The recognition that knowledge begins with experience creates appropriate humility about the limitations of human understanding, while the systematic methodology creates justified confidence that reliable knowledge remains within human reach through disciplined inquiry. The systematic architecture of the Lyceum begins to shift and expand, preparing to accommodate the revolutionary challenges to classical epistemology that emerged during the scientific revolution and modern philosophy. Your journey through questions about knowledge continues, carrying you toward territories where both Platonic rationalism and Aristotelian empiricism encounter fundamental challenges that will reshape the entire epistemological enterprise. The gentle rhythm of your breathing now carries both the confidence of systematic methodology and the openness to experience that characterizes genuine empirical inquiry. preparing you to explore how modern philosophers transformed both rationalist and empiricist traditions in response to new mathematical, scientific, and philosophical developments that challenged classical assumptions about the nature and possibility of human knowledge. As the systematic architecture of Aristotelian empiricism gradually dissolves into geometric precision, the philosophical landscape transforms into the austere study of René Descartes, a room warmed by a single fire where, on a winter day in 1619, one of philosophy's most radical experiments in doubt began. The atmosphere here is charged with methodical skepticism and mathematical certainty, where the entire edifice of inherited knowledge is systematically dismantled in order to discover whether any absolutely certain foundation for knowledge can be found. Welcome to the birthplace of modern epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the revolutionary fervor of systematic doubt and the austere confidence of mathematical reasoning. Here we encounter Descartes' momentous attempt to rebuild the entire structure of human knowledge on foundations so secure that no reasonable doubt could ever shake them. This Cartesian project of methodical doubt transformed not just philosophy, but our entire understanding of what it means to know something with certainty. As you enter Descartes' winter retreat, you immediately feel the intellectual atmosphere of radical questioning that pervades the space. Unlike Socratic questioning, which exposed the ignorance hidden within apparent knowledge, or Platonic doubt about sensory experience, Cartesian doubt is methodical and universal. Everything that can possibly be doubted will be doubted, not because Descartes wants to become a skeptic, but because he wants to discover what, if anything, survives the most rigorous possible skeptical challenge. Methodical doubt, the voice explains, operates like a philosophical acid that dissolves every belief that contains even the smallest possibility of error. Can we trust our senses? No, because they sometimes deceive us, and something that deceives us even occasionally cannot serve as the foundation for certain knowledge. Can we trust mathematical reasoning? Perhaps not, because we sometimes make computational errors, and perhaps an evil demon could be systematically deceiving us about even our clearest rational insights. The study demonstrates this process of systematic doubt through scenarios that unfold before your contemplative awareness. You experience how sensory knowledge dissolves under skeptical pressure. The realization that dreams can feel as vivid as waking experience, that perspective and distance can create illusions, that madness can make false experiences seem completely convincing. You feel how even mathematical knowledge begins to waver when you consider the logical possibility of systematic deception by some malevolent power. But then, the voice continues, in the midst of this universal doubt, Descartes makes his famous discovery. There is one thing that cannot be doubted even by the most systematic skeptical hypothesis, the fact that doubt is occurring. Even if an evil demon is deceiving me about everything, the very fact that I am being deceived proves that I exist as a thinking being. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, becomes the first absolutely certain truth. The winter study reveals the profound implications of this Cartesian breakthrough. The cogito provides not just one certain truth, but a method for recognizing certainty, the criterion of clear and distinct perception. Whatever presents itself to the mind with the same self-evident clarity as the cogito can be accepted as certainly true. This creates the foundation for a systematic reconstruction of knowledge based on geometric method. Cartesian epistemology, the voice explains, attempts to extend mathematical certainty into all domains of knowledge by building deductively from self-evident first principles, just as geometric theorems can be derived with absolute certainty from clearly perceived axioms. All genuine knowledge should be derivable from clearly and distinctly perceived ideas through valid, logical inference. This creates the dream of making all knowledge as certain as mathematics. The study now demonstrates how this method works through examples from Cartesian physics and metaphysics. You observe how the clear and distinct idea of extension provides the foundation for understanding physical reality as essentially geometric. How the clear and distinct idea of God as perfect being provides the foundation for trusting clear and distinct perceptions generally. How the systematic application of doubt and deduction creates an interconnected system of certain knowledge. What makes Cartesian epistemology particularly influential? The voice notes, its tone growing more contemplative as your relaxation deepens, is how it addresses the problem of the criterion that plagued earlier approaches. Instead of assuming we know what knowledge is and then looking for examples, Descartes discovers the criterion of certainty through the very process of methodical doubt. Clear and distinct perception becomes the mark of genuine knowledge because it survives the most rigorous possible skeptical challenge. The geometric precision of Cartesian method now reveals both its power and its limitations. The demand for absolute certainty creates extraordinarily high standards that provide genuine knowledge where they can be met, but these standards may be too demanding for most of the beliefs that guide practical life. The sharp distinction between mind and matter creates conceptual clarity, but raises new problems about how mind and matter interact. The Cartesian legacy, the voice observes, established both the ideal of systematic, methodical approaches to knowledge and the recognition that such approaches must grapple seriously with skeptical challenges. Even philosophers who reject specific Cartesian conclusions continue to be influenced by the demand for methodical rigor and the need to address radical doubt. The Winter study begins to expand beyond its original boundaries, revealing how Cartesian rationalism inspired both followers who extended the geometric method and critics who questioned whether genuine knowledge requires such absolute foundations. The crystalline moments of knowledge pulse with the rhythm of methodical doubt followed by systematic reconstruction, showing how intellectual courage to question everything can become the foundation for rebuilding understanding on more secure ground. As we prepare to explore the empiricist response to Cartesian rationalism, the voice suggests, notice how the quest for certainty transforms the relationship between knowledge and doubt. Doubt becomes not the enemy of knowledge, but its most reliable ally, the tool that separates genuine knowledge from mere opinion, clear insight from comfortable assumption, reliable foundation from inherited prejudice. The geometric architecture of Cartesian rationalism begins to soften and flow, preparing to accommodate the more experience-based approaches to knowledge that emerged partly in response to rationalist confidence in purely deductive reasoning. Your journey through epistemological questions continues, carrying you toward territories where the Cartesian demand for systematic method encounters the empiricist insistence that all knowledge ultimately derives from sensory experience. As the geometric precision of Cartesian rationalism gradually gives way to something more organic and observational, the philosophical landscape transforms into the empiricist laboratories and observatories of 17th and 18th century Britain, places where knowledge is sought not through deductive reasoning from innate ideas, but through careful attention to the deliverances of sensory experience. The atmosphere here is charged with experimental curiosity and inductive inference, where the mind is conceived not as a repository of eternal truths, but as a blank slate written upon by experience. Welcome to the empiricist revolution, the voice greets you, now carrying the patient attentiveness of systematic observation and the humble confidence of thinkers who believed that reliable knowledge emerges from careful attention to experience rather than deductive reasoning from supposedly self-evident first principles. Here, we encounter the radical claim that all knowledge ultimately derives from sensory experience, that the mind contributes nothing to knowledge except the capacity to receive, organize, and compare the ideas that experience provides. As you enter this empiricist domain, you first encounter John Locke's revolutionary essay concerning human understanding, where the mind is compared to a blank piece of white paper, void of all characters, without any ideas. All the materials of reason and knowledge come from experience through two sources: sensation, which provides ideas of external objects, and reflection, which provides ideas of the mind's own operations as it processes sensory data. Lockean empiricism, the voice explains, challenges the very foundations of rationalist epistemology by denying the existence of innate ideas. When rationalists point to seemingly universal concepts like mathematical truths or logical principles, Locke argues that these can be explained through the mind's processing of sensory experience rather than requiring inborn knowledge. Even our most abstract concepts ultimately derive from simple ideas received through the senses. The empiricist landscape demonstrates this through detailed analyses of how complex ideas emerge from simple sensory components. You observe how the idea of a golden mountain combines the simple ideas of gold, received through sight and touch, and mountain, received through various sensory experiences. You see how mathematical concepts like number derive from the mind's capacity to abstract and combine units originally perceived through sensory experience. This empiricist approach, the voice continues, creates a very different picture of knowledge acquisition from rationalist approaches. Instead of moving from self-evident first principles to particular conclusions through deduction, empirical knowledge moves from particular observations to general conclusions through induction. Instead of requiring clear and distinct rational insight, empirical knowledge emerges through the gradual accumulation and organization of sensory experience. The scene now shifts to reveal David Hume's more radical development of empiricist principles in his Scottish study, where he pushes the logic of experience-based knowledge to conclusions that challenge our most basic assumptions about causation, personal identity, and the external world. Hume's analysis reveals how strictly empiricist principles lead to systematic skepticism about many beliefs we ordinarily take for granted. Humean empiricism, the voice explains, its tone growing more contemplative as your relaxation deepens, demonstrates that experience alone cannot justify many beliefs that seem essential to both common sense and scientific reasoning. When you observe one billiard ball striking another and causing it to move, what you actually experience is temporal succession, first one event, then another, but never the causal connection itself. Causation becomes not a feature of reality, but a habit of expectation based on repeated experience of conjunction. This Humean analysis reveals how empiricist principles, taken to their logical conclusion, undermine confidence in inductive reasoning itself. You observe how the assumption that future experience will resemble past experience cannot be justified through either logical deduction, since the future has not yet been experienced, or inductive inference, since that would involve circular reasoning. This creates what philosophers call the problem of induction. Hume's skeptical conclusions, the voice notes, extend beyond causation to challenge our beliefs in personal identity, the external world, and rational justification generally. If knowledge comes only from experience, and experience provides only disconnected impressions without necessary connections, then most of our ordinary beliefs lack adequate justification. Yet Hume also recognizes that these beliefs are psychologically inevitable. Nature is stronger than reason. The empiricist domain now reveals its paradoxical character through scenarios that demonstrate both the power and the limitations of experience-based knowledge. You observe how careful empirical observation enables scientific discoveries that transcend ordinary experience, yet also how the demand for experiential justification leads to skeptical conclusions that make even scientific knowledge appear questionable. What emerges from the empiricist tradition, the voice continues, is a more modest, but perhaps more realistic approach to knowledge than either ancient certainties or rationalist systematicity. Empirical knowledge becomes provisional, probabilistic, and revisable rather than certain and eternal. This creates space for scientific progress through the gradual improvement of theories based on new observations rather than requiring deductive proof from first principles. The empiricist landscape demonstrates how this approach transforms the relationship between knowledge and action. Instead of requiring certain knowledge before acting, empiricism suggests that we must act on the basis of probable knowledge derived from experience, always remaining open to revision based on new evidence. This creates a more dynamic, experimental approach to both theoretical understanding and practical wisdom. The empiricist legacy, the voice observes, established both the centrality of experience in knowledge acquisition and the recognition that experience-based knowledge faces distinctive challenges around induction, causation, and the relationship between appearance and reality. These challenges continue to influence contemporary epistemology and philosophy of science. The observational instruments and experimental apparatus of empiricist inquiry now reveal their deeper epistemological significance. They represent not just tools for gathering information, but methods for disciplining and extending natural human sensory capacities, creating more reliable and systematic forms of experience than ordinary perception provides. British empiricism also introduced crucial insights about the psychology of belief formation, the voice continues. Instead of treating beliefs as purely rational responses to evidence, empiricists began investigating how association, habit, custom, and other psychological mechanisms shape what we believe and how strongly we believe it. This opened up new approaches to understanding both the strengths and the limitations of human knowledge. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the rhythm of inductive inference. Particular observations, suggesting general patterns, repeated experiences, creating expectations about future regularities, careful experimentation testing theoretical hypotheses against observable consequences. Your breathing synchronizes with this empirical rhythm, each breath bringing new observational possibilities, each exhalation releasing attachment to a priori assumptions. As we prepare to explore how later philosophers attempted to synthesize rationalist and empiricist insights, the voice suggests, notice how the empiricist turned to experience transforms intellectual humility. The recognition that knowledge depends on fallible sensory experience creates appropriate modesty about the scope and certainty of human understanding. While the systematic methods of empirical inquiry create justified confidence that reliable knowledge remains possible through disciplined attention to experience. The experimental apparatus of empirical inquiry begins to combine with geometric instruments of rational analysis, preparing to accommodate the critical philosophy that emerged from attempts to integrate empiricist attention to experience with rationalist demands for systematic organization. Your journey through epistemological questions continues, carrying you toward territories where the limitations of both purely empirical and purely rational approaches generate synthetic philosophies that attempt to honor insights from both traditions while transcending the limitations of either alone. As the empirical laboratories gradually merge with rational geometric spaces, the philosophical landscape transforms into the systematic architecture of Immanuel Kant's critical philosophy, a vast cathedral of thought where the competing claims of rationalism and empiricism are not simply rejected or accepted, but transcended through a revolutionary synthesis that reconceives the very nature of knowledge itself. The atmosphere here is charged with intellectual revolution and synthetic insight, where traditional epistemological problems receive solutions that transform the very questions being asked. Welcome to the Kantian revolution in epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the systematic grandeur of critical philosophy and the revolutionary confidence of a thinker who believed he had discovered how to navigate between the Scylla of dogmatic rationalism and the Charybdis of skeptical empiricism. Here, we encounter perhaps the most influential attempt to explain how genuine knowledge is possible despite the limitations revealed by both rationalist and empiricist traditions. Through recognizing that the mind actively contributes to the structure of experience, rather than passively receiving either innate ideas or sensory impressions. As you enter this critical philosophical domain, you first encounter Kant's famous question: how are synthetic a priori judgments possible? This question emerges from recognizing that mathematical and scientific knowledge seems to possess characteristics that neither purely rational nor purely empirical approaches can adequately explain. Knowledge that is both informative about the world, synthetic, and knowable independently of particular experiences, a priori. The Kantian insight, the voice explains, resolves this puzzle by recognizing that the mind brings certain structural features to experience rather than deriving all knowledge from experience or possessing innate knowledge about objects. Space and time are not features of things as they exist independently of experience, but forms of human sensory intuition that we necessarily impose on whatever we experience. Categories like causation and substance are not features discovered in experience or known through pure reason, but concepts that the understanding necessarily uses to organize sensory experience into coherent knowledge. The critical architecture demonstrates this through the famous Kantian distinction between phenomena, things as they appear to us, and noumena, things as they might exist independently of our ways of experiencing them. You observe how this distinction allows Kant to preserve both the objectivity of empirical knowledge, phenomena follow universal laws, and appropriate intellectual humility. We cannot know things in themselves beyond the conditions of possible experience. This creates the Kantian Copernican revolution in epistemology, the voice continues, its tone growing more contemplative as your understanding deepens. Instead of assuming that knowledge must conform to objects, Kant proposes that objects, as we can know them, must conform to the conditions that make knowledge possible. We can have universal and necessary knowledge about the empirical world because that world is partly constructed through universal and necessary features of human cognition. The systematic architecture now reveals how this approach resolves many traditional epistemological problems. The problem of induction receives new treatment through the recognition that the principle of causation is a necessary condition for the possibility of experience rather than a hypothesis derived from experience. Skeptical challenges about the external world are addressed by showing that the distinction between subjective representations and objective experience is constituted within experience, rather than requiring access to some domain beyond experience. Kantian epistemology, the voice explains, establishes both the possibility and the limits of human knowledge through transcendental analysis, investigation of the conditions that make experience and knowledge possible. We can have genuine knowledge within the domain of possible experience, but we cannot have theoretical knowledge about matters that transcend the conditions of sensory experience. God, freedom, immortality. Though practical reason may provide different forms of access to these ultimate questions. The critical domain demonstrates this through detailed analyses of how different types of knowledge operate within their proper spheres. You observe how mathematical knowledge achieves universality and necessity through the pure forms of space and time, how empirical knowledge achieves objectivity through the application of categories to sensory experience, how moral knowledge operates through practical reason's recognition of the categorical imperative. This systematic approach, the voice notes, transforms the relationship between knowledge and skepticism. Instead of trying to refute skeptical arguments directly, Kant shows how they result from illegitimate extensions of knowledge claims beyond their proper domain. Empirical knowledge becomes secure within its proper boundaries while remaining appropriately modest about its scope and ultimate foundations. The Kantian synthesis now reveals its deeper implications for understanding the nature of objectivity itself. Instead of requiring mind-independent access to reality, objectivity becomes intersubjective universality, knowledge that any rational being with our cognitive structure would necessarily share. This preserves the possibility of genuine knowledge while acknowledging its dependence on the nature of knowing subjects. What makes Kantian epistemology particularly profound, the voice continues, is how it reconceives the relationship between knowledge and reality. We cannot know reality as it exists absolutely independently of any perspective, but we can have genuine knowledge of reality as it necessarily appears to beings with our cognitive constitution. This eliminates the gap between appearance and reality that created problems for earlier approaches. The critical architecture also demonstrates how Kant addresses the relationship between theoretical and practical knowledge. While theoretical knowledge is limited to the domain of possible experience, practical knowledge, knowledge needed for moral action, operates through reason's recognition of moral laws that cannot be derived from empirical observation, but are nevertheless objectively valid for all rational agents. The Kantian legacy, the voice observes, established both the possibility of systematic philosophical criticism and the recognition that human knowledge operates within structural limitations that cannot be transcended through either empirical observation or rational analysis alone. This created space for both appropriate confidence in scientific knowledge and appropriate humility about ultimate metaphysical questions. The systematic architecture now reveals its influence on subsequent epistemological development. You perceive how post-Kantian philosophers either extended the critical approach into new domains or reacted against its apparent limitations, but few could ignore the fundamental insights about the active, constructive role of mind in knowledge and the importance of investigating the conditions that make knowledge possible. Contemporary epistemology continues to grapple with Kantian insights, the voice suggests, particularly the recognition that knowledge involves both receptivity to experience and spontaneous conceptual activity, that objectivity is compatible with perspective dependence, and that the investigation of knowledge requires attention to the cognitive capacities and limitations of knowing subjects. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the rhythm of transcendental synthesis. Sensory receptivity and conceptual spontaneity working together to create structured experience, particular observations, and universal principles mutually supporting each other, theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom operating in their appropriate domains. Your breathing synchronizes with this synthetic rhythm, each breath integrating multiple aspects of cognitive activity, each exhalation releasing false dilemmas between reason and experience. As we prepare to explore how contemporary philosophers have extended and challenged the Kantian synthesis, the voice says, notice how critical philosophy transforms the relationship between intellectual confidence and intellectual humility. The systematic investigation of cognitive capacities creates justified confidence in knowledge within its proper domain, while the recognition of cognitive limitations creates appropriate modesty about ultimate questions that exceed the boundaries of possible experience. The critical architecture begins to evolve and diversify, preparing to accommodate the various post-Kantian developments that have emerged from attempts to extend, modify, or transcend the critical synthesis. Your journey through epistemological questions continues, carrying you toward territories where Kantian insights encounter challenges from historicist, pragmatist, and naturalistic approaches that question whether knowledge can be understood apart from its social, practical, and biological contexts. As the systematic architecture of Kantian critical philosophy begins to flow and adapt to changing circumstances, the epistemological landscape transforms into the bustling workshop of American pragmatism, a place where knowledge is understood not as static correspondence between mind and reality, but as a dynamic tool for navigating and transforming experience. The atmosphere here is charged with experimental energy and practical wisdom, where truth becomes not eternal correspondence, but successful guidance in the ongoing adventure of inquiry and action. Welcome to the pragmatist revolution in epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the experimental spirit of American democracy and the practical wisdom of thinkers who believed that the value of ideas lies not in their correspondence to abstract reality, but in their capacity to guide successful action in concrete situations. Here, we encounter a fundamental reconception of truth, knowledge, and inquiry that emerges from taking seriously the biological, social, and practical contexts within which human knowing actually occurs. As you enter this pragmatist domain, you first encounter Charles Sanders Peirce's revolutionary insight that the meaning of concepts consists in their practical consequences, that to understand what we mean by calling something hard, we need to consider what practical differences this makes for how we expect it to behave under various conditions. This pragmatic maxim transforms epistemology by connecting meaning and truth directly to experiential consequences rather than abstract correspondence. Peircean pragmatism, the voice explains, reconceives inquiry as a process of moving from genuine doubt, created by obstacles to successful action, toward stable belief, which enables confident action through experimental investigation. Truth becomes not static correspondence, but the opinion toward which inquiry would converge in the long run if continued indefinitely by a community of investigators using proper methods. The Pragmatist Workshop demonstrates this through living examples of how inquiry actually operates in both scientific and everyday contexts. You observe how genuine questions arise from practical problems rather than abstract curiosity, how hypotheses are tested through their consequences for action rather than their logical derivation from first principles, how truth emerges through the social process of inquiry rather than individual insight into eternal reality. This approach, the voice continues, dissolves many traditional epistemological problems by showing how they arise from false abstractions. The problem of skepticism about the external world disappears when we recognize that our beliefs about external objects are tools for predicting and controlling experience rather than copies of mind-independent reality. The problem of induction is transformed when we understand scientific laws as stable habits of expectation rather than eternal truths about reality's ultimate structure. The scene now shifts to reveal William James's radical extension of pragmatic principles to all domains of human belief and experience. Jamesian pragmatism applies the pragmatic test not just to scientific concepts, but to religious, moral, and metaphysical beliefs, asking not whether they correspond to eternal truth, but whether they make beneficial differences in actual human lives and experience. Jamesian pragmatism, the voice explains, its tone growing more personal and intimate, recognizes that human beings are not pure intellects seeking theoretical truth, but living organisms with practical needs, emotional responses, and value commitments that legitimately influence what we believe and how we inquire. The will to believe operates properly in domains where theoretical evidence is insufficient, but practical stakes are high, forcing us to choose beliefs that shape the very experiences that might confirm or disconfirm them. This creates a more democratic and pluralistic approach to knowledge that acknowledges the legitimacy of different types of inquiry and different criteria for success. You observe how scientific, religious, aesthetic, and moral forms of knowledge might operate according to different pragmatic criteria without necessarily conflicting, since they address different aspects of human experience and serve different practical purposes. What makes pragmatism particularly revolutionary, the voice notes, is how it naturalizes epistemology by understanding knowledge as a biological and social phenomenon rather than a mysterious relation between mind and reality. Knowing becomes a natural capacity that evolved because it serves survival and flourishing, not a supernatural faculty that provides access to eternal truth. The Pragmatist Workshop now reveals John Dewey's systematic reconstruction of epistemology as experimental inquiry, guided by the democratic ideal of intelligent cooperation in addressing shared problems. Deweyan pragmatism transforms knowledge from private possession into public resource, from individual achievement into collective enterprise, from theoretical contemplation into experimental problem solving. Deweyan experimentalism, the voice continues, shows how knowledge emerges through the interaction between organisms and environments in the process of solving problems and achieving desired outcomes. Ideas become hypotheses for action rather than representations of reality. Truth becomes warranted assertability rather than correspondence. Inquiry becomes social experimentation rather than individual contemplation. This approach reveals how traditional epistemological problems dissolve when knowledge is understood in its proper biological and social context. The problem of other minds disappears when we recognize that minded behavior is directly observable rather than hidden behind physical appearances. The problem of objective versus subjective knowledge is transformed when we understand objectivity as the outcome of properly conducted social inquiry rather than escape from all perspective. Pragmatist epistemology, the voice observes, also transforms the relationship between theory and practice by showing how they are interdependent aspects of intelligent inquiry rather than separate domains. The most abstract theoretical knowledge serves practical purposes, while the most practical knowledge involves theoretical assumptions. This integration eliminates artificial hierarchies between pure and applied knowledge. The workshop demonstrates this integration through examples from education, science, democracy, and everyday problem solving that show how successful practice requires theoretical understanding, while successful theory emerges from practical engagement with concrete problems. Knowledge becomes neither purely theoretical nor purely practical, but intelligently experimental. What's particularly profound about the pragmatist approach, the voice continues, its tone growing more contemplative as your relaxation deepens, is how it transforms the relationship between certainty and inquiry. Instead of requiring certainty as the goal of inquiry, pragmatism treats certainty as inquiry's temporary resting place, the stable beliefs that enable confident action until new problems create new doubts that restart the inquiry process. This creates a more dynamic and fallibilistic approach to knowledge that embraces revision and growth rather than fearing them. You observe how pragmatist inquiry remains permanently open to revision while maintaining sufficient confidence to guide effective action, how it integrates intellectual humility with practical wisdom, how it honors both the provisional nature of knowledge and its genuine reliability for appropriate purposes. The pragmatist legacy, the voice suggests, established both the contextual nature of knowledge and the legitimacy of pluralistic approaches to different types of problems. Knowledge becomes not a single, unified system, but a diverse collection of tools appropriate to different purposes and contexts, unified only by common commitment to experimental methods and democratic values. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the rhythm of experimental inquiry, problems generating hypotheses, actions testing consequences, results modifying future inquiry, all embedded within social communities that provide both resources and standards for intelligent investigation. Your breathing synchronizes with this experimental rhythm, each breath supporting engaged inquiry, each exhalation releasing attachment to fixed conclusions. As we prepare to explore contemporary challenges to traditional epistemology, the voice says, notice how pragmatism transforms the relationship between knowledge and life by showing how they are intimately connected rather than separate domains. The anxiety about theoretical certainty dissolves into appreciation for practical reliability. The pressure to achieve absolute truth relaxes into commitment to ongoing improvement through experimental inquiry guided by democratic values. The experimental workshop begins to expand and diversify, preparing to accommodate contemporary developments in epistemology that build on pragmatist insights while addressing new challenges from feminist, postmodern, and naturalistic approaches to knowledge. Your journey through epistemological questions continues, carrying you toward territories where the social, cultural, and biological contexts of knowledge receive even more systematic attention than early pragmatists envisioned. As the experimental workshop of pragmatism expands to embrace broader communities of inquiry, the epistemological landscape transforms into a vast network of interconnected social spaces where knowledge reveals itself as fundamentally collaborative, cultural, and historically situated. Libraries merge with laboratories, classrooms connect with communities, and individual minds participate in collective intelligence that transcends any single perspective. The atmosphere here pulses with dialogical energy and democratic wisdom, where truth emerges through social interaction rather than individual insight. Welcome to the social turn in epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the collaborative rhythms of community inquiry and the inclusive wisdom of thinkers who recognize that knowledge is always created, maintained, and validated within social contexts that shape both its content and its criteria for acceptance. Here, we encounter the revolutionary recognition that what counts as knowledge cannot be separated from the social processes, power relationships, and cultural frameworks within which knowledge claims are made, evaluated, and accepted or rejected. As you enter this socially constructed epistemological domain, you first encounter the insight that even our most basic categories for organizing experience, space and time, cause and effect, self and other, are culturally variable rather than universally necessary. Different cultures construct different ways of knowing that emphasize different aspects of experience and use different criteria for distinguishing reliable from unreliable knowledge claims. Social epistemology, the voice explains, reveals how knowledge depends on language, institutions, traditions, and communities of practice that exist prior to any individual knower and continue beyond any individual lifetime. We don't create knowledge from scratch, but inherit conceptual schemes, methodological practices, and evaluative criteria that shape what we can know and how we can know it. Even our most personal beliefs are socially mediated through concepts, values, and practices we've learned from others. The networked landscape demonstrates this through examples from scientific communities, religious traditions, artistic movements, and professional cultures that show how knowledge emerges through collective inquiry rather than individual discovery. You observe how scientific findings depend on peer review processes, how religious understanding develops through interpretive communities, how artistic insight emerges through dialogue between tradition and innovation. This social understanding, the voice continues, transforms traditional epistemological problems by revealing their hidden social dimensions. The problem of objectivity becomes not escape from all perspective, but coordination between multiple perspectives through social processes that transcend individual limitations. The problem of truth becomes not correspondence to mind-independent reality, but convergence of judgment within communities that use appropriate methods and standards. The scene now reveals feminist epistemology's crucial insight that traditional approaches to knowledge often reflect particular social positions, typically those of privileged groups, while claiming universal validity. Women's ways of knowing, indigenous knowledge systems, and perspectives from marginalized communities reveal aspects of reality that dominant epistemological frameworks often overlook or distort. Feminist epistemology, the voice explains, its tone growing more inclusive and nuanced, shows how social location affects what questions get asked, what methods seem appropriate, what evidence counts as relevant, and what conclusions appear plausible. Rather than eliminating perspective to achieve objectivity, Feminist approaches suggest that including multiple perspectives, especially those from marginalized positions, produces more complete and accurate understanding than any single standpoint can achieve. This creates what Sandra Harding calls strong objectivity, knowledge that becomes more objective by acknowledging rather than hiding its social contexts, and by systematically including perspectives that dominant groups might overlook. You observe how standpoint epistemology reveals hidden assumptions in supposedly neutral knowledge, while opening space for more inclusive and comprehensive approaches to understanding. The social construction of knowledge, the voice notes, doesn't imply that all knowledge claims are equally valid, or that truth is merely relative to cultural perspective. Rather, it reveals that knowledge validation is itself a social process that operates according to standards that can be criticized, revised, and improved through democratic participation and inclusive dialogue. The networked domain now reveals postmodern insights about the relationship between knowledge and power, showing how claims to knowledge often serve interests in maintaining or challenging existing social arrangements. Michel Foucault's analyses reveal how knowledge and power are intimately connected. Not just that power influences what counts as knowledge, but that knowledge claims themselves are exercises of power that shape social reality. These postmodern insights, the voice continues, create both challenges and opportunities for epistemology. The challenge is to maintain commitment to standards of evidence and reasoning while acknowledging their social and historical contingency. The opportunity is to develop more democratic, inclusive, and reflexive approaches to knowledge that remain open to criticism and revision while avoiding both dogmatism and relativism. The social epistemological landscape now demonstrates how contemporary digital technologies are transforming the social processes through which knowledge is created, validated, and disseminated. You observe how online communities of inquiry can transcend traditional geographical and institutional boundaries, while also creating new challenges around information quality, expertise validation, and the spread of misinformation. Digital epistemology, the voice explains, reveals both the promises and the perils of democratized knowledge production. The same technologies that enable unprecedented collaboration and access to information also create echo chambers, filter bubbles, and opportunities for deliberate deception that challenge traditional gatekeeping mechanisms without necessarily replacing them with more reliable alternatives. The networked domain shows how these developments require new approaches to epistemic virtues, qualities like intellectual humility, curiosity, and careful attention to evidence that help individuals navigate complex information environments. You observe how epistemic responsibility becomes both individual and collective, requiring both personal commitment to intellectual virtues and social institutions that support reliable knowledge production. What emerges from the social turn, the voice observes, its tone growing more contemplative as your understanding deepens, is recognition that knowledge is simultaneously individual and collective, personal and public, subjective and objective. We know as individuals, but always within social contexts that provide both resources and constraints for individual knowing. This integration transcends traditional oppositions between individual and social epistemology. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the rhythm of social dialogue, questions and answers flowing between multiple participants, individual insights contributing to collective understanding, diverse perspectives enriching rather than threatening reliable knowledge. Your breathing synchronizes with this dialogical rhythm, each breath participating in the larger conversation of human inquiry. As we prepare to explore how naturalized approaches to epistemology ground knowledge in biological and evolutionary contexts, the voice suggests, notice how the social understanding of knowledge transforms intellectual virtues. The individualistic pursuit of certain truth becomes collaborative engagement in ongoing inquiry. The competitive defense of fixed positions transforms into cooperative participation in knowledge construction guided by democratic values and inclusive methods. The networked architecture begins to reveal its biological foundations, preparing to accommodate naturalistic approaches that understand knowledge as a biological phenomenon shaped by evolutionary pressures and implemented through neural mechanisms that developed to solve practical problems of survival and reproduction rather than to achieve theoretical insight into eternal truths. As the social networks of knowledge gradually reveal their biological substrates, the epistemological landscape transforms into a living ecosystem where minds are understood not as supernatural faculties for accessing eternal truth, but as natural phenomena that evolve to solve practical problems of survival and reproduction in complex environments. The atmosphere here pulses with evolutionary rhythms and neural processes, where knowledge becomes a biological adaptation rather than a mysterious relation between mind and reality. Welcome to naturalized epistemology, the voice greets you, now carrying the patient rhythms of evolutionary development and the systematic insights of cognitive science applied to traditional philosophical questions. Here, we encounter the revolutionary approach that treats knowledge as a natural phenomenon to be studied empirically rather than a transcendental capacity to be analyzed through pure conceptual reflection. This naturalistic turn grounds epistemology in biology, psychology, and neuroscience, while transforming traditional questions about the nature and possibility of knowledge. As you enter this naturalized domain, you first encounter W.V.O. Quine's influential argument that epistemology should be replaced by, or at least supplemented with, empirical psychology. Instead of asking how knowledge is possible in principle, naturalized epistemology investigates how knowledge actually works in practice, how biological organisms like humans actually acquire, process, and use information about their environments. Quinean naturalism, the voice explains, dissolves the traditional boundary between conceptual analysis and empirical investigation by showing how philosophical questions about knowledge can only be answered through scientific study of actual cognitive processes. We cannot understand what knowledge is or how it's possible independently of understanding how minds actually work as biological systems embedded in natural and social environments. The evolutionary landscape demonstrates this through detailed accounts of how cognitive capacities developed through natural selection to solve adaptive problems rather than to achieve theoretical understanding. You observe how perception evolved to detect environmental opportunities and threats rather than to provide accurate copies of objective reality. How memory evolved to guide future behavior rather than to preserve perfect records of past events. How reasoning evolved to support practical decision-making rather than to discover eternal logical truths. This evolutionary perspective, the voice continues, its tone growing more contemplative as your relaxation deepens, explains both the successes and the limitations of human knowledge. Our cognitive capacities are well adapted for the practical problems our ancestors faced, but may be poorly suited for the abstract, theoretical problems that interest philosophers and scientists. This creates systematic biases and limitations that empirical study can identify, and that methodological sophistication can partially overcome. The naturalized domain now reveals insights from contemporary cognitive science about how knowledge actually works at the neural level. You observe how perception involves active construction rather than passive reception, how memory involves reconstruction rather than simple retrieval, how reasoning involves heuristic shortcuts rather than formal logical processes, how belief formation involves emotional and social factors alongside purely evidential considerations. Cognitive science, the voice explains, reveals that human minds are not ideal rational agents, but biological systems that use efficient shortcuts, operate under resource constraints, and integrate cognitive and emotional processes in ways that traditional epistemology often ignored. Understanding these natural processes provides more realistic foundations for normative questions about how we ought to form and evaluate beliefs. The landscape demonstrates how this naturalistic understanding transforms traditional epistemological problems. The problem of skepticism becomes less urgent when we recognize that perfect certainty was never a realistic goal for biological cognitive systems. The problem of induction becomes more tractable when we understand inductive reasoning as a natural capacity that evolved because it generally works well in stable environments. Naturalized epistemology, the voice notes, also reveals the continuity between human knowledge and other forms of biological information processing, the same basic mechanisms that allow bacteria to track nutrients, that enable birds to navigate during migration, and that help mammals recognize social relationships also underlie human capacities for scientific reasoning and philosophical reflection, though they operate at different levels of complexity and sophistication. This continuity perspective shows how human knowledge, despite its unique features, remains fundamentally connected to other natural phenomena rather than requiring supernatural explanation. You observe how cultural evolution builds on biological evolution, how social learning amplifies individual cognitive capacities, how technological tools extend natural information processing abilities. The naturalized approach, the voice continues, transforms the relationship between descriptive and normative questions about knowledge. Instead of treating these as completely separate domains, naturalized epistemology shows how understanding how we actually think can inform recommendations about how we ought to think, while normative ideals can guide empirical research into cognitive improvement. The evolutionary ecosystem now reveals how naturalized approaches address questions about epistemic virtue and intellectual character. Rather than treating these as purely abstract ideals, evolutionary epistemology investigates which cognitive traits and practices actually promote successful inquiry and reliable belief formation in natural and social environments. Naturalized virtue epistemology, the voice explains, grounds traditional intellectual virtues like curiosity, open-mindedness, and intellectual humility in empirical understanding of which traits support effective learning and inquiry. This creates more realistic and achievable approaches to intellectual character development based on understanding how minds actually work rather than how they ideally should work. The naturalized landscape demonstrates how these insights apply to contemporary challenges around expertise, testimony, and social learning. You observe how understanding the psychology of trust and testimony can improve our ability to identify reliable sources of information, how recognizing cognitive biases can improve decision-making, how understanding group dynamics can enhance collaborative inquiry, What emerges from naturalized epistemology, the voice observes, is a more humble but also more hopeful approach to knowledge that accepts biological limitations while identifying opportunities for improvement through better methods, institutions, and practices. Knowledge becomes not a supernatural achievement, but a natural capacity that can be cultivated and enhanced through understanding how it works. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with biological rhythms, neural processes supporting perception and memory, evolutionary pressures shaping cognitive capacities, social learning mechanisms enabling cultural transmission of knowledge. Your breathing synchronizes with these natural rhythms, each breath participating in the biological processes that sustain consciousness and inquiry. As we prepare to explore how contemporary epistemology integrates insights from all these traditions, the voice suggests, notice how naturalization transforms the relationship between knowledge and life by showing how deeply they are connected. The anxiety about achieving impossible standards of certainty dissolves into appreciation for the remarkable achievements of natural cognitive capacities. The pressure to escape biological limitations transforms into commitment to working skillfully within them. The evolutionary ecosystem begins to incorporate elements from all the epistemological traditions you've encountered, preparing to accommodate contemporary approaches that integrate classical insights about truth and justification with modern understanding of social context and biological foundation. Your journey through epistemological questions approaches its culmination as these diverse insights converge into more comprehensive understanding of how knowledge works in practice. As the naturalized foundation of knowledge begins to encompass and connect with all the epistemological territories you've explored throughout your journey, the philosophical landscape transforms into a vast observatory where different approaches to understanding knowledge reveal their underlying unity within the greater mystery of how finite beings like ourselves can achieve reliable understanding of ourselves and our world. Ancient questions about certainty and doubt, classical theories about reason and experience, modern investigations of social and biological context, all converge into an integrated vision of knowledge as both achievement and ongoing process. Welcome to the contemporary integration of epistemological approaches. The voice greets you, now speaking from the convergence point where all traditions of inquiry into knowledge meet and enrich each other rather than simply competing for exclusive validity. Here, we discover how each approach to understanding knowledge, from Socratic questioning to naturalized cognitive science, contributes essential insights to a more complete picture of how knowledge works in practice, why it sometimes fails, and how it might be improved through better understanding of its conditions and limitations. As you enter this integrative domain, you immediately perceive how the various epistemological traditions you've encountered illuminate different aspects of the same complex phenomenon. Socratic recognition of ignorance becomes the foundation for intellectual humility that guides all genuine inquiry. Platonic aspiration toward truth provides motivation for sustained investigation despite practical difficulties. Aristotelian systematic methodology offers tools for organizing and evaluating different types of knowledge claims. This integration, the voice explains, reveals that epistemological traditions are not simply competing theories to be judged against each other, but complementary approaches that address different aspects of knowledge or different contexts in which knowledge operates. Rationalist insights about the necessity of conceptual organization remain valid even when supplemented by empiricist attention to experiential foundations. Kantian recognition of mind's active role in knowledge remains important even when situated within social and biological contexts that Kant didn't fully appreciate. The observatory demonstrates this integration through living examples that show how contemporary approaches to specific epistemological problems draw insights from multiple traditions. You observe how scientific methodology combines empiricist attention to observation with rationalist demands for systematic organization. How contemporary philosophy of science integrates logical analysis with sociological investigation of scientific communities. How cognitive science uses naturalistic methods to investigate questions that originated in classical epistemology. What emerges from this integration, the voice continues, its tone growing more contemplative as your understanding deepens, is a more nuanced and realistic picture of knowledge as both individual achievement and social construction, both natural capacity and cultural development, both reliable tool for navigating reality and ongoing process of inquiry that remains forever open to revision and improvement. The integrative observatory now reveals how different epistemological approaches provide resources for addressing contemporary challenges that no single tradition could handle alone. Climate science requires both empirical investigation and social coordination. Medical knowledge combines biological understanding with attention to cultural factors that affect health outcomes. Democratic decision-making requires both individual epistemic virtues and social institutions that support reliable collective inquiry. Contemporary epistemology, the voice explains, increasingly recognizes that knowledge is neither purely objective nor purely subjective, but emerges through the interaction between knowers and reality, mediated by biological capacities, cultural frameworks, and social institutions. This interactive understanding transcends traditional oppositions between realist and anti-realist approaches to truth, between individualist and collectivist approaches to justification, between naturalist and normative approaches to epistemic evaluation. The observatory demonstrates how this integrated approach transforms traditional epistemological problems by revealing their false presuppositions. The problem of skepticism dissolves when we recognize that absolute certainty was never a realistic goal for biological beings operating in complex environments. The problem of relativism disappears when we understand that acknowledging the contextual nature of knowledge doesn't eliminate standards for distinguishing better from worse approaches to inquiry. This integration also reveals new epistemological problems that emerge from our improved understanding of knowledge. The voice notes, how do we navigate information environments where anyone can publish anything? How do we maintain appropriate trust and expertise while remaining open to legitimate criticism? How do we balance individual epistemic autonomy with recognition of our dependence on others for most of what we know? The integrative domain shows how addressing these contemporary challenges requires combining insights from multiple epistemological traditions. Ancient emphasis on intellectual virtue provides guidance for individual epistemic responsibility in complex information environments. Modern systematic methodology offers tools for evaluating competing knowledge claims. Social epistemology reveals how to structure institutions that support reliable collective inquiry. Naturalized approaches ground all of these in realistic understanding of human cognitive capacities and limitations. What makes this integration particularly hopeful, the voice observes, is how it preserves the core insight of each epistemological tradition while avoiding their characteristic excesses. We can maintain Platonic aspiration toward truth without requiring escape from the empirical world. We can embrace empiricist attention to experience without falling into naive trust in uninterpreted observation. We can appreciate social construction of knowledge without abandoning standards for distinguishing reliable from unreliable inquiry. The observatory now reveals its deepest insight, that the question, how do we know what we know, doesn't have a single, final answer, but opens onto an ongoing process of understanding and improving the various ways that knowledge emerges through the interaction between minds and reality. Knowledge becomes not a fixed achievement, but a dynamic process that can always be refined through better understanding of its conditions and better design of its supporting practices and institutions. This process understanding of knowledge, the voice continues, transforms the relationship between epistemological theory and epistemic practice. Instead of treating epistemology as abstract analysis that has little relevance to actual knowledge production, contemporary approaches show how understanding knowledge can improve knowledge by revealing hidden assumptions, identifying systematic biases, and suggesting better methods for individual and collective inquiry. The crystalline moments of knowledge around you now pulse with the integrated rhythm of multiple epistemological approaches working together: individual virtue and social coordination, empirical observation and rational analysis, natural capacity and cultural development, all participating in the ongoing human project of understanding ourselves and our world with increasing sophistication and reliability. As we prepare for the final phase of our epistemological journey, the voice says, rest in this integrated understanding that embraces both the remarkable achievements and the persistent limitations of human knowledge, both the diversity of approaches to understanding knowledge and their underlying unity in the common project of inquiry, both the contextual nature of all knowledge claims and the possibility of genuine progress in understanding through disciplined attention to evidence and argument. The integrative observatory begins to prepare for transformation into a space where all these insights about knowledge can be absorbed not just intellectually, but experientially, where understanding the nature of knowledge becomes integrated with the lived experience of being knowing beings in a complex world that both supports and challenges our efforts to understand it. Your journey through epistemological questions approaches its conclusion, carrying you toward a final recognition of both the mystery and the achievement that knowledge represents in human life. As the integrative observatory slowly dissolves around you, its vast synthesis of epistemological understanding condensing into a single, luminous moment of recognition, you find yourself returning to where your journey began. The simple mystery of knowing something, the profound puzzle of being a conscious being capable of asking questions about the nature of knowledge itself. Yet this return is not a retreat, but a homecoming enriched by all the insights you have gathered, all the perspectives you have explored, all the wisdom you have encountered about the deepest questions of human understanding. Welcome to the return to wonder, the voice speaks, now indistinguishable from your own deepest recognition about the nature of knowledge and truth. Here, we complete the circle of epistemological understanding by recognizing that every exploration of knowledge ultimately returns us to the fundamental mystery of being knowing beings in a knowable world, creatures capable of questioning their own understanding, of improving their methods of inquiry, of recognizing both the achievements and the limitations of human knowledge. As you rest in this moment of integrated understanding, you perceive how it contains and encompasses all the epistemological approaches you've explored. The Socratic recognition of ignorance reveals itself as the foundation for all genuine learning. The Platonic aspiration toward truth provides the motivation that sustains inquiry through difficulties and setbacks. The Aristotelian methodology offers practical guidance for systematic investigation. The Cartesian demand for systematic doubt creates the critical attitude that distinguishes knowledge from mere opinion. The simple act of knowing, the voice continues, whether it's recognizing a familiar face, understanding a mathematical proof, grasping the meaning of a poem, or appreciating the significance of a scientific discovery, remains as mysterious and wonderful as it was when human beings first became aware of their own consciousness. No amount of philosophical analysis or scientific investigation eliminates the profound puzzle of how finite beings like ourselves can achieve genuine understanding of ourselves and our world. You begin to understand how your journey through epistemological questions has been consciousness exploring its own capacity for knowledge, not just learning about different theories of knowledge, but experiencing directly how the questioning mind encounters the various ways that understanding emerges, develops, and transforms through engagement with experience, with others, and with the ongoing adventure of inquiry itself. This recognition, the voice observes, transforms the entire relationship to questions about knowledge and truth. The anxiety about achieving impossible certainty dissolves when uncertainty is recognized as the natural condition that makes genuine inquiry possible. The pressure to defend fixed positions relaxes into appreciation for the ongoing conversation of human understanding that spans cultures and centuries while remaining always open to new insights and better methods. The simple mystery of knowing something, this thought occurring to you now, this memory of yesterday's conversation, this anticipation of tomorrow's possibilities, reveals its infinite depth while remaining perfectly accessible through the ordinary miracle of conscious awareness. You perceive how every moment of understanding participates in the vast network of human knowledge while retaining its utterly personal, immediate character. What your journey through epistemological perspectives has revealed, the voice continues, its tone now carrying the gentle finality of complete understanding, is that knowledge is neither pure achievement nor complete illusion, but the ongoing relationship between consciousness and reality mediated by biological capacity, cultural framework, and social institution. We know imperfectly, but genuinely, provisionally, but reliably, contextually, but with legitimate claims to objectivity achieved through disciplined inquiry and democratic dialogue. As you absorb this final epistemological teaching, you notice how your breathing has become perfectly natural and effortless. Each inhalation drawing in the mystery of consciousness, encountering reality. Each exhalation releasing attachment to impossible standards of certainty while maintaining commitment to the ongoing project of understanding. Your heartbeat provides the steady rhythm that connects your individual knowing to the collective human enterprise of inquiry that spans generations and cultures. The epistemological approaches you have explored, the voice suggests, are not abstract theories to be memorized, but practical wisdom to be lived. Socratic questioning helps maintain intellectual humility in daily encounters with knowledge claims. Empirical attention to experience keeps understanding grounded in observation rather than mere speculation. Rational analysis provides tools for organizing and evaluating different types of evidence. Social awareness reveals the collaborative nature of reliable knowledge. Naturalistic understanding situates human knowing within biological and evolutionary contexts that both enable and limit cognitive achievement. You begin to perceive how each epistemological insight offers practical guidance for conscious engagement with the ongoing adventure of learning and understanding. Present moment awareness that integrates multiple approaches to knowledge, conscious participation in knowledge, creation through careful attention to evidence and argument, recognition of knowledge as both individual achievement and social construction, and appreciation of knowing as profound gift rather than merely practical tool. As your exploration of epistemological questions concludes, the voice says, remember that every moment offers opportunities for practicing the epistemic virtues gained through this journey. Intellectual humility that remains open to correction and new learning, careful attention to evidence that distinguishes reliable from unreliable sources, appreciation for different perspectives that enriches rather than threatens understanding, and commitment to methods of inquiry that serve both individual understanding and collective wisdom. The simple mystery of knowledge expands to reveal its cosmic dimensions. This capacity for understanding that emerged through billions of years of cosmic evolution, that developed through millions of years of biological evolution, that crystallized through thousands of years of cultural evolution, and that manifests through your own individual development as a conscious being capable of questioning the very processes through which consciousness encounters and understands reality. Knowledge, you have discovered, is neither puzzle to be solved once and for all, nor arbitrary construction to be dismissed as mere opinion, the voice concludes. It is the ongoing adventure of finite beings engaged in the endless project of understanding themselves and their world through methods that remain forever open to improvement, guided by values that honor both truth and human flourishing, supported by communities that provide both resources and standards for reliable inquiry. As you drift toward sleep, you carry with you not just information about different theories of knowledge, but a transformed relationship to the very process of knowing itself. The questions you encounter tomorrow will be approached with greater intellectual humility and more sophisticated methods. The knowledge claims you evaluate will be assessed using more nuanced criteria that honor both the achievements and the limitations of human understanding. The conversations you have about controversial topics will be guided by epistemic virtues that support productive dialogue rather than defensive argumentation. Rest now in the understanding that you are knowing beings in a knowable world where the adventure of inquiry continues across generations, where each individual contribution to understanding participates in the larger human project of learning to live wisely in a complex cosmos, the voice whispers as sleep approaches. Your dreams tonight will continue exploring the mysteries of knowledge and truth. Your sleep will provide rest within the biological rhythms that sustain conscious inquiry, and your awakening will return you to the ongoing adventure of understanding enriched by deeper appreciation for both the possibilities and the responsibilities that come with being creatures capable of knowledge. The simple mystery of knowing gently embraces your approaching sleep, neither rushing toward unconsciousness nor resisting the natural transition from waking awareness to sleeping exploration of consciousness. Knowledge flows through this transition like a gentle current that carries awareness through different states, while remaining itself the unchanging capacity within which all changes in understanding occur. Knowledge is both the question and its own answer, both the mystery and the ongoing exploration of mystery, both the achievement and the endless process of achieving. The voice concludes, as consciousness prepares for the epistemological transformation of sleep. In recognizing knowledge's true nature, You have discovered your own nature as beings whose finite understanding participates in infinite inquiry, whose limited perspectives contribute to unlimited conversation, whose individual questioning mind participates in the cosmic adventure of consciousness, coming to understand itself through every possible form of knowledge and truth. The journey through epistemological questions completes itself in this moment of peaceful transition from waking inquiry to sleeping exploration, carrying with it the wisdom of all cultures and all thinkers who have contemplated the deepest mysteries of human understanding. Knowledge reveals itself as the sacred relationship between consciousness and reality, the ongoing conversation between finitude and infinity, the eternal adventure of beings capable of asking questions about the very capacity that makes questioning possible.